We're now moving from financial capital to real capital, and Dalia Marin of the University of Munich is going to speak about the role of multinationals in the economy and new trade theory. When I was in college, there was a new trade theory. Apparently, there's now a new trade theory.
First of all, I would like to thank the organizer for this exciting conference. And since this is the Institute for New Economic Thinking, I'm going to talk about, and there was a lot of economics bashing economics, I would like to talk about some developments in economic theory that responded to developments in the real world. Okay, so I call it the new international division of labor in the world economy. So what is it? Firms and the world are facing a new global environment. What is it? First, the new international division of labor has been expressed in the fact that a large part of trade is now trade in components and trade in input goods. And the second feature of the new international world order is that we have a rise in intra-firm trade. This is trade that takes place inside the multinational corporation. This is trade that takes place inside firm boundaries. The third effect is that we find an explosion in foreign direct investment. We have heard about this a lot today. And the fourth is that we have seen a rise of countries as super traders, which are countries with export ratios exceeding 100%. And lastly, it's the explosion of CEO pay in rich countries. So the question, all these facts that I just showed you are an expression of the new international division of labor that we are facing. At the same time, we have seen a fundamental change in the way firms are organized. First, we have seen a breakup of the conglomerate with a stronger focus to core competencies. We have seen a decentralization in the decision-making inside firms. So firms have the tendency to become, to have flatter hierarchies. Then we have seen that talent has become the new stakeholder of the firm. It used to be the case that it was the physical assets, the machinery, that was the asset of the firm. But today, it's the human capital that is actually the asset of the firm. And lastly, we have seen shifts in the boundaries of firm, with offshoring and outsourcing on the one hand and merger activity on the other. So the questions that I would like to raise is, what is the connection between these two developments, between the new feature of international trade on the one hand and between the new cooperation on the other? Now, an answer to this question requires a new theory, and this new theory is now called the new theory in correspondence to the new theory that was developed in the 80s. And this new theory brings firms with organizations into international trade, and I will talk more about this. So what was the old trade theory doing? And basically, the old trade theory explained inter-industry trade. It explained why France was exporting cars, skill-intensive cars, to China, and why China was exporting labor-intensive textiles to France. The challenge that this theory faced in the 80s was that this theory could not explain 60% of world trade, namely trade between rich countries. Now, the new trade theory, developed by Krugman and Helpman-Krugman in the early 80s, introduced imperfect competition and economies of scale into international trade. And this new trade theory tried to explain intra-industry trade. So it explained why skill-rich Germany is exporting cars to France, the BMW or Mercedes, and why France is exporting the Peugeot and the Renault to Germany. So this is trade that takes place within the same industry. The challenge that we face today is globalization. And globalization is what I just described to you, is the new feature of trade, which is that a large part of trade takes place inside firm boundaries, and it's an ever larger share of world trade is in components and in intermediate goods. So what is the new trade theory doing? It opens up the black box of firms and brings firms with organizations into international trade and foreign direct investment. And the people that are mentioned here are some of the contributors to this theory. So what is the new trade theory doing? Here, new trade theory explains intra-firm trade, and it explains why a German parent multinational sends an engine, say VW, sends an engine to its affiliate in Slovakia, and the affiliate in Slovakia sends back the full car to Germany. So it's trade within the multinational corporation. Okay, we have seen that in the last 20 years, there was a big increase in the trade exposure of countries, and the question is, how did firms respond to this great trade exposure that they were facing? And there were basically two responses. One was that corporations were slicing up the value chain in international value chains, producing different stages of production in different countries in order to exploit differences in factor costs. And the second was that firms were introducing flatter chains of command to cut costs and to find and retain high-skilled workers. So let me start with slicing up the value chain. The question is, why do firms do it? Basically, the firm has to make two decisions. One is, how much control does the firm want to have over the firm activity? Does it want to produce inside the firm or outside? And the second question is, where does the firm produce, at home or abroad? Now, offshoring is a relocation of production to a low-wage country like Eastern Europe, China, inside the firm, then it's called foreign direct investment, or to an independent input supplier in the foreign country, then it's called outsourcing. How important is offshoring? Okay. So basically, I show you here figures between Austria and Germany and all of Eastern Europe, including Russia and the former Soviet Union. And what you see here, basically, the total, if you take the total imports of Austria from Eastern Europe, including Russia and so on, how much of it takes place inside the multinational corporation? The answer is about 70%. If you'd ask that in Germany, it's about 20%. But see, there is lots of variation. With some countries, like Slovakia, which is a big location for the German car industry, it's about 65%. So the second question I want to ask is, why are firms producing in flatter chains of commands? And basically, there is the following mechanism. When the country is faced with more trade and more competition, then in the firm, it matters more who runs the firm. It matters more whether the power is centralized at the top of the organization or whether it's delegated to lower levels. There is more at stake. But on the other hand, it becomes more important to generate new ideas for the firm. And that's something that tends to lead to more decentralization in the corporation. So at some point, the firm wants to decentralize because it becomes very important to generate new ideas. But when foreign competition becomes very tough, then the firm starts to re-centralize again. Now here you see figures between the level of decentralization and the number of foreign competitors in Austria and in Germany. And what you see is here the level of competition, and the vertical axis gives you the degree of decentralization. The larger the larger this is, the more decentralized it is, and you see it's clearly that firms decentralize with more competition.
5 minutes.
Okay, what happens now when, this is one effect that trade has on the decentralization of the firm. But there's a second effect, which is what I would call the war for talent. So with more international trade, actually, there are more opportunities for human capital outside the firm. And that makes talent more mobile. Talent leaves the firm more easily. But remember, it's now the human capital is now the big assets of the new firm. So it's very threatening for the firm when talent leaves, because basically it's threatened to lose the asset. And therefore, the firm needs to think about how to organize, and decentralization, giving power to the talent, making him like an owner, is a way to respond to this. So when trade leads to new firms entering, competing with incumbent firms for these manager talent, and that leads to a war for talent. So the question is, why does it matter how firms organize? You give you here an example of Germany's super competitiveness. Germany has been accused of being competitive because of an internal devaluation. But my research suggests, I mean, it's true that, that there was a wage restraint. But my research suggests that actually this offshoring of activity to Eastern Europe was a very important for Germany's productivity increase. As you can see here, firms that were facing lower input tariffs were offshoring more, and these firms were then more productive. Of course, what you see here is a correlation, and there are causality issues raised here. What you also see is that firms that offshore more face a lower number of foreign competitors. So obviously, offshoring helps to compete with your rivals. And this is part of the reason why in Austria and Germany we didn't find so much a strong effect on unemployment from offshoring, because basically offshoring helped firms to gain market shares and therefore to increase employment, actually. Now, another issue where the organization matters is the financial crisis. Because we have seen that in a world in which firms adjust internally, what you see is that adjustments to shocks take place inside the firm rather than across sectors. Now, the question, we have seen that in the global financial crisis, the trade collapse was great. It was even greater than in the interwar period. And so the question was, why did that happen? And one candidate explanation was the international supply chain. So the question was, is the fact that firms are organized in international value chains contributing to a magnification of the shock, or contributing to a dampening of the shock? And the preliminary answer of the empirical results suggests that it's actually contributing to dampening the shock, because basically it is very expensive to disrupt supply relationships. And therefore, it's costly. So therefore, you only do it if you expect this to last forever. And so it's a similar kind of discussion that we had in the financial crisis of 1998, when there was basically saying there were two types of capital flows, the good one, which is the FDI, and the bad one, which is portfolio. And there was a similar argument made for FDI that it's more stuck. Here, this is a similar argument here. And apparently, empirically, it turns out to be the case. I'm overflowing my time. What's the effect? So the first effect is the skill premium. So what I found is, basically in Germany and in Austria, the skill premium was flat, okay? And I was estimating how much did offshoring explain of this decline or flatness in the skill premium, and the answer is that it's 41 to 36%. Offshoring reduced the skill premium by that amount. The second effect is CEO pay. Now, we have seen that CEO pay has been exploding in the 90s. This was true in the US, and it's true in Germany. And so the question is, how is trade affecting CEO pay? And the answer is that there are two effects. One is that firms shift more to incentive-based pay when they are faced with more trade. And second, there is what I already described as the war for talent, and this war for talent, the competition by firms competing for the available managers in the country, is rising up CEO pay. Okay. So the big effect is now the income inequality. So I already described that the income that CEO pay has risen much, and the skill premium has remained flat, and as a result, there was a rise in inequality among the highly educated rather than between skilled and unskilled workers. That's the new feature, actually, and that's true for the United States as well. And therefore, that's the big challenge that we are facing here. We are seeing levels of inequality that we haven't seen since the 1929. But the problem is that it's now middle class, skilled people who are not getting enough income. So what's the policy conclusion? Do we need a new policy? Answer, not really. Although trade policy is now shifting from the goods side to the factor side, so it's more, in this global age, it's more important to have human resource policies than trade policies, because governments can shift now their comparative advantage by attracting skilled workers. And the second challenge is offshoring. And here we have a new conflict of interest between it used to be the case that we had a conflict of interest between the export competing sector and the import competing sector, between capital and labor. Now it seems to be that it is within these groups of skilled labor, and it is between the work that can be offshored to other countries or not offshoreable to other countries. So the trade policy becomes an issue of the firm boundaries, the firm organization, rather than in which sector it is placed. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that fascinating presentation.